welcome back to the Confidence Show podcast. Today we've got another fabulous guest on with us. I'm delighted to introduce you to Han Talbot, who is a freelance creative project manager and host of the Remote Life podcast, a show with a mission to empower people to live their remote life dreams. Since studying abroad in Brazil and realising she could write her thesis on the beach, Hannah's been living the remote life on and off for the past 10 years. Welcome, love. It's so exciting to have you here. How are you doing?
Hello, welcome. Well, I might say welcome. Hi, I'm running my own podcast. I get like really confused about being a guest. So I'm like, yeah, it's my unsaid. Okay, I'm doing good. Like I said, I find August quite a quiet, scary month. So I'm just sort of like, I'm obviously flapping at the moment.
It happens to us all. Don't worry at all. It's like that habit, isn't it? As you say, like you've got your own podcast, the Remote Life podcast. So I suppose you're used to just having guests on there and doing the introduction for them and then being like, hi.
Yeah, like you guys can talk. I ask the questions and I'm on the other side.
It's nerve-wracking, isn't it? Like I always get really nervous before I do like a podcast interview with someone, and then even as the host, because I've only just started having guests on, I'm also like, oh my god, how do you be a good host?
Yeah, definitely. We all have our different formulas, and I know, I feel like for myself, I'm a massive nerd for like the remote life. So in my mind, I'm like, I just want to ask all the questions, and like that's partially why I do my podcast anyway, so I can ask all those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can ask questions as we go through. If there's anything you want to ask me, it's fine.
I swear.
Okay, so in your intro, as we just mentioned, you are a freelance creative project manager. Can you tell us a little bit about what that actually entails and how you got into it?
Yeah, so it's whenever I kind of mention it, most people kind of go creative where, and on just for a really easy way for me to kind of encompass all of my communications, marketing, events, and project management experience under one umbrella. But essentially, I got into it because I started a blog back when I was studying abroad at 21, and I realized that people were creating careers out of social media. And I was like, I want to do that too, because academia was not for me, let's put it that way. So I went about creating my own portfolio. I went about creating Han Meets World in 2016. So I created a website, social media presence, and all the rest of it, while also building professional work experience in literally communications experience, like strategy, social media, PR. Like I did kind of everything for a little while just to kind of get some general experience under my belt, as you do when you first graduate. And then it kind of just sort of happened to fall into a really good category of being able to then consult and provide advice and more of an overview of how to do campaigns in different areas. So it was kind of a happy coincidence and something that I sort of created for myself when I went freelance 3.5 years ago. Yeah, so it's just sort of encompasses everything that I do professionally, and it just sort of allows different people, I mean, different people want to call it different things from like time to time. And for me, I've never been too bothered about titles. It just is kind of an easy way to explain what I am from the off before diving into what I actually can do and all my experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. And I think it's so cool how you didn't really have a plan of this was what's going to happen, but everything that you did all pieced together quite well. And I'm sure it's so valuable for your clients that you've got more of like a holistic approach when it comes to like marketing and communications, because you've done lots of different areas, so you can really fit the puzzle pieces together rather than just looking at this one little area that's not going to have such a big impact.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a blessing and a curse at the same time, because on one hand, people will go, well, why don't you have just, for example, why aren't you stuck to one industry, for example, in your knowledge? Whereas for me, yeah, that's exactly it. I'm like, I know what I'm like as a person and how I think as a person. I'm a big picture person. So therefore, strategy and big pictures work for me. Having a general overview of being able to, of how to do things suits me as a person, whereas I've never been too good at just being able to focus on just one section of a project. For example, I'm not too detail oriented. dare I say. So on that, in that perspective, it is exactly that. Like you said, it's been able to, like, with the clients I have worked with, it's been really useful, because then I've gone, oh, but like this like campaign we did this, oh, and this, there was this trend like coming up, we could do this. So it's more of a me personality fit, with not like giving with the experience underneath, versus, yeah, like you said, having this kind of like structural experience that's very by the book and like very formulaic. So it does allow me to be able to give a lot more broader knowledge and experience to clients in what they want to do quite often.
That's so good, and I'm sure it's so valuable to them as well. And you also mentioned that you had started your blog, Han Meets World, in 2016, and we actually met in 2016. And I just assumed that your blog had been established for years at that point. I can't believe it was only then that you kind of set it up. So kind of tell us a little bit about why you decided to set it up in the first place, and was it the first step in you becoming a digital nomad?
That's wild. It's been that long since we've known each other, by the way. That's so crazy. Because I bring up how, like, because we met at that open space, didn't we? We were invited to like come and check out a co-work space, and I remember like saying to someone, I was like, no, like I've been invited and been doing these bits and pieces since that time, like when it was more towards the girl boss era. But this has been a thing for a while.
It is crazy though, because even when I think about when we met then, like I hadn't even gone remote then, like I wasn't even a digital nomad then, I was still in my 9 to 5, and it was really when I was like setting up my business as a social media manager. So we were both probably at a very similar stage, and I just assumed that you were so much further along than me.
No, I had that. So funnily enough, that was one of the first times that in full-time employment that I had, it was kind of more like it was essentially a contract within 9 to 5. Oh my gosh, what's it called? You know, full-time PAYE. Like I was still a full-time employee, but it was more like a contract basis. And I remember I had to have so many conversations, because of course we were like, I was 23 at the time or something like that. So of course they're like, oh my gosh, we can't possibly leave her alone and stuff to like be anonymous. And I was like, no guys, look, I've been invited to come and check out this workspace. Please can I go along for one day? You can call me whenever you need to. You can like send me messages. Like I'm not going to go off the grid. I remember having like these real conversations, like to convince them that I'm still going to do my work day within, like, because eventually after that as well, I then had to say to them, look, the Wi-Fi in the office is not good for social media. I have to then go and actually use my own home Wi-Fi. That actually really was where I started going, right, I can get so much done when I'm left to be autonomous and get, you know, just work. I remember like that was a real like pivotal moment, if you will, from like being like, no, if I'm surrounded by the environment that helps me create, then you're going to get better results as a client or, you know, employer. So that was really funny.
That's so interesting. I feel like my environment has such a massive impact on how productive I am. Like a couple of weeks ago, I'm going through, I'm like transcribing all my podcast episodes at the moment, and I've got like 40 to do, and I've done 6 at the moment. And the first one I did, it took me like 5 hours, because I was sat at home and I was just so uninspired, and I think I was on the sofa and I was like, God, this is such a slog. So last week I took myself to like a coffee, I'd go to Tesco's because there's like a cafe up there. I sat there, and in 3 hours, 2 hours I think it was, I got 3 transcribed and 1 uploaded, and I was just like, this is insane how productive I can be simply by changing my environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that even like I say to people, even while I was in full-time employment, like even my first job out of university, and because I wrote my dissertation while I was living abroad. We were one of the like 2 universities that made you do a dissertation abroad and in the target language at the time. And I was like, well, you know, you've got to really properly think about your environment here, and like, is your Wi-Fi good? Do you have the books you need? Whatever it is. And so I'd already been trained to kind of think about how I want to work. And I remember when I went into my first job as well, I was like, I'm literally my desk faces into 2 corners. That's not inspiring. Like, what? And of course, when you've got people coming in all the time going, oh, can I borrow you for a minute? Can I borrow you for a minute? And then they go, oh, why isn't that paper done? why isn't that like emailed down? You're like, because I keep being bothered every few minutes. So I remember, yeah, especially when we went to that workspace, although of course it was really exciting to obviously meet you girls, for example, I remember because it was set up in a way that was sort of more open, more creative. I can't remember what the space was called at the time. Is it even open anymore? It was in Hackney Wick, wasn't it? But and that was in, do you know what's really funny actually, side note, that was in the FT, and the back of my head is in a piece of press for that workspace. So weird. No, yeah, I was to go back to your point, sorry. No, I think it really does matter. It really does matter about like being able to provide an environment and being able to trust that as workers, as employees, we know what kind of setup works best for us. Some people it's noise, some people it's quiet, some people it's being around loads of people, some people it's really not. So it's, yeah, do you need headphones in? I remember there was one workplace I worked in that was like no headphones, and I was like, what? It's like being in school again.
Oh my god, I need headphones.
So,
like I have to put my headphones in, music on really loud, and that's what like helps me tune out. Like that's what gets me really in the flow of what I'm doing. I have to have the music really loud so I can't hear anything else, and like that's how I work best.
Same. I have so many thoughts going around in my head all the time because I'm a person who loves ideas and solutions and things. So I'm like, I need to have even just kind of like I even have loads of playlists on YouTube that's like cafe background noise that I will sit and listen to while I'm at home or like B&B, solely because again it's just white noise that you can kind of, like you said, funnel your focus into.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. Okay, so going back to your blog, Han Meets World, that kind of your first step into becoming a digital nomad? Like, was that the entry point? I know you spoke about the different jobs and the different roles that you had, and that kind of created this idea that actually you could work remotely. But in terms of creating your own thing to go remote with, was your blog the starting point?
I think the big realization that I could work where I wanted to, there's so many points that I can pinpoint it back to. I could put it back as far as being 13 and sitting outside learning Spanish during the school holidays with my teacher. That's how far I could go back and say, no, that's where I used to learn and be most productive, was in a fun, exciting environment. Because then I go back into school in September and be like, these 4 brick walls. But I think then, of course, like being a student, I was then like, well, I can write my thesis and be on the beach and see more of the world. Then Han Meets World, really, because like I wrote a blog for that back then, and then I kind of didn't know where to go during my final year of university, because again I was like, I'm not really a fashion person, I'm not really a travel person because I'm still here, so I did bits and pieces. But then Han Meets World kind of really came about because I was like, I feel like as graduates we were being well, in my university it felt like we were kind of being funneled into corporate roles, and I actually got scouted by a couple like big companies, but it just didn't appeal to me. I was like, okay, I feel like I should be impressed because of the name, but it's not, there's something not drawing me in. And so from there I was like, right, I know that I want to work in social media, which back then, believe it or not, like for anyone who's listening, was just not as big a deal. The only social media roles that you could really get were in London and big cities, I found. So again I was like, okay, how do I go from, I know that I don't want to go into a graduate scheme, so therefore how do I bridge this gap to where I want to be? And I found that the Han Meets World just gave me this platform to really talk about how I did things differently, to talk about we don't have to do this one thing that we're being told that we have to do. Because yeah, I had a languages degree and people were going, do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to be a tour guide? Do you want to be a translator? And I was going, nope. What the heck now? And what Han Meets World did was just able me to build my blog writing skills, for one thing. My first post was atrocious, but it allowed me to hone my writing skills. It allowed me to showcase that I can build a brand from scratch. It allowed me to do all these different bits and pieces that then accumulated into a social media following, everything that kind of employers were starting to look for. And it gave me more of like a, rather than having like a, oh, my grades were good, I've got this like bit of experience, I've got this bit of experience, and now I'm going to go to the next level. It provided me more of a portfolio to then be able to go to employers and go, look, I'm a self-starter, I'm proactive, here's what I can do, like, let me help you. So yeah, and then now it's become a bit more into remote life, where to work and all the rest of it. But yeah, what it definitely provided me in the early days was more of a portfolio to be able to showcase my skills.
And that's such a valuable resource to have, especially when you've got lots of other people trying to fight for the same role. You've got not only the grades and the experience in terms of doing the degree or like doing the other little jobs that you had, you've also got the portfolio to say, well, actually, I've done all this myself. So if I can do all this for myself, can you imagine what I can do for you?
It was literally that, which as a graduate, again, even like 5 years ago, people were going, wow, okay, yeah, we want her.
Yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. So when did you commit to moving into the remote way of living completely, like full time, and how did you kind of prepare yourself for it?
So I like to kind of say that I've been on off remote honestly for about 10 years, because again, it sort of all started when I did a study year abroad in Brazil. So already a bit of experience there. And then of course, yeah, as I mentioned before, I did bits and pieces of remote working anyway, because I was starting to see this trend. It's really funny actually, some of the influencers I've worked with since, I was putting them in like research papers and things for people like, you know, back in 2015 and whatnot. But I think for me, the pandemic was honestly where it really allowed me to go, right, I'm going to work from here. I mean, it kind of, yeah, it sounds like a bit kind of like a lot of people have done that now, but I think up until that point, I was more than happy to do even like half in Surrey, half in London, whereas the pandemic kind of gave me the opportunity to really look at, okay, what are my priorities? What do I want from my clients as much as, you know, what can I give? And yeah, of course, we were all trying to figure out how to work. Well, most of us were trying to figure out how to work remote fully anyway. So it's just a really good opportunity to just keep putting it out there. And then yeah, I've been full-time traveling since October last year. And how do I prepare for that one? Again, I feel like I can't properly answer that question, because you know, we spent a year before the study abroad year thinking about like risks and how to look for accommodation. So in my mind, like I've been mentally prepared for that kind of stuff already. But I think from my perspective, the best ways I would probably like maybe say top 3 ways I would consider preparing for it would be thinking about why you want to go remote for one thing. Because a lot of people go, oh, I wish I could also be on the beach. And it's like, yeah, like don't get me wrong, the beach is great, but I go to the beach in the evening or on the weekend. I don't sit there 5 days a week in my bikini on my laptop, like, because I can't guarantee Wi-Fi. So I think about why it is you want to go remote. Like, is it because you work best that way? Is it because you want to see more of the world? Is it because, or whatever it may be? There's a rise in digital nomad families at the moment. Is because you want to spend more time with your family? Do you want to cut out your commute? Whatever it happens to be. I would then look at where like the Wi-Fi situation, and also like, well, yeah, do you want to be in an Airbnb? Do you want to live in a hostel? Do you want to live in co-living? Like, what is it you want to be surrounded by? And then yeah, I guess it's kind of just thinking about what can you live without, what can you live with. Do you want to just take hand luggage? Do you just want to take a backpack? For me, I was a hand luggage person like for probably between my study abroad back in 2014 up until last year. I could go with hand luggage easily, but now I'm like, I need certain things. I like having wardrobe choices. I like having extra pairs of shoes, thanks very much. So I do have 23 kilos of luggage on a roller suitcase that I do take around with me. So what kind of, I'd say that those are sort of things to think about.
I think it's really good to have that kind of vision for how you want it to be as well, because your vision can change, and it may be that you decide to go away for the first time and then you're like, oh, actually I don't want to live in a hostel, or I don't want to co-live, or maybe you live in an apartment and you're like, oh, this is a bit lonely, maybe I do want to co-live. So your vision can change, but having an initial idea of what you actually want it to look like can help you make those smaller plans, and it can kind of help you feel a little bit more confident to actually do do the remote thing, do the traveling as well. I feel like, what did you say a second ago? And I was like, oh, I feel like we did the opposite. Oh, how you say like you don't go to the beach during the day, like that's what you do in the evenings. I feel like we are the complete opposite, because I don't like getting up in the morning. I am most productive at the moment. Like my current productivity levels are between like 9 p.m. and midnight. So I spend a lot of my day doing whatever I feel like, really. I'll have a few hours, like between like 10 and 1, I'm pretty productive. And then I'll take most afternoons off because I just don't have the creativity in that time. And especially at the moment, it's so hot. I just feel exhausted. I'm like, I can't do anything now. So my like hours are like pretty like 9 till midnight at the moment, sometimes even later. And I really enjoy that quiet time, and that works for me.
I'm the same. I've always kind of had this, even in full-time employment, I've always had what I call my brain dead time, you know, like kind of where like the lights go out or like the Wi-Fi drops kind of vibes. I have this sort of dead zone where like between, I'd say about 1 o'clock to 3/4 in the afternoon. It's the siesta period, right? It's like the siesta period. It's but yeah, I'm exactly the same. Like I will either make myself do tasks that are mundane, I can stick a film on and just sort of like do stuff in the background, or yeah, I'm like you, I will go take a walk. But I think I meant it more in like the perspective of you know, you don't sit in your bikini all day like pretending that you're doing work when actually you're ordering mimosas and like having a jolly. So it's more in that perspective.
Absolutely. So where was the like first place that you spent an extended period of time living? Because I know you said you've been like traveling since October. So has that been lots of different places, or did you settle in one place for a little while?
I didn't intend to do it the way I've done it up until this point, funnily enough. I think it was just, well, so originally the plan was I kind of traveled slowly, but not slowly, through Spain and then Portugal, and then came back home for Christmas. But again, I was like, that was literally 2 weeks max in like Porto, Madrid. But then I did like a week in Valencia, a week in Palma, in Mallorca. And then, then I actually did spend some extended time in Croatia via Slovenia, because that was the only place that you could get a direct flight to at the time, because we were still in quite a few COVID restrictions. So I got the train over from Ljubljana to Zagreb, spent 6 weeks in Split, and then did Dubrovnik. Oh no, sorry, it was Zagreb, Split, Dubrovnik. And then I did another 5 weeks in Mexico City because I went and visited a friend. And those two are probably the longest I'd spent into places abroad since I left. The original plan was to spend a bit more of slower time getting to know places. So that's my plan now for a little bit, because it was getting a bit nuts at one point. I came back from Mexico City to the UK to pick up a phone because mine had been stolen in Mexico City. Then I did Dubrovnik for a week, Kansas City for a week, Montreal for a week, and came back to the UK again. And that just honestly wrecked me. That was just too much for my body. But that was for events that I've been invited to. So, well, at the moment, not planning on doing that again. But yeah.
It is exhausting. Like actually traveling really takes it out of you. And especially like they're quite big flights, like they're very long haul, aren't they? Going from like Croatia to Canada and to Mexico City and then to London, like back to the UK. Like they're big flights, and it does take a toll on your body. So I'm not surprised you were exhausted.
Do you know what? It got the fast travel thing out my system, which was helpful. I still got some eco anxiety around it, but it's made me kind of go, right, no, like let's be sensible now. And so I am going to do a couple smaller trips in September. But then the plan, I have had some friends going like, come to Bali. And I'm like, I want to go to Bali, but then that's another crazy ass couple flights. So no, I think I'm going to just try and be really sensible and stick it out and do maybe 2 more European countries after September for like a month each or something like that until Christmas again. It takes some practice. I feel like people are, oh, you know what you're doing. I'm like, no, I'm just sort of playing it like as it goes, especially when I'm building my podcast as well. But I think you do kind of have to give yourself a bit of wiggle room, and just to sort of figure out what it is you want. Because again, like we talked about before, you can have a plan to do one thing and then that completely can be flipped on its head.
Absolutely. It's nice to have that little flow. Like I have always, whenever I've traveled, I've always done extended period of times. Like I moved to Thailand for a year. I was in Australia for nearly 2. I was in Honduras for 18 months. Like my trips have always been like longer trips, and they work really well for me because I like to immerse myself in the kind of culture of things. But now I'm older, I actually prefer the shorter trips because I've also, my niece was born nearly a year ago now, so I'm like, I want to be a part of her life. Like I feel like there's more for me to stay in the UK for longer term, and I don't necessarily want to stay here forever. Like I still want to do the big trips. I want to move to Bali, but I feel like a trip to Bali would be like 3 months, or like I don't know, I don't want to do that for like a couple of weeks, but I really want to enjoy like much smaller trips, like a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there, and it just feels nice at this time.
Yeah, definitely, especially with obviously the new Bali visa coming in. I'm like, okay, I'd rather than do a crazy like quick trip over even for a month. Like a month in my head to go to Bali from the UK is a lot in my head now, like as much as, you know, that the effort that it's got to take. So there's a lot more to think about and a lot more resources available as a digital nomad now as well. So I think, especially from my perspective, I feel like I'm always that person that's like, oh my god, I've got to do it now or never. And it's like, no, hang on, like, well, let's think about this properly. Like, you've still got lots of life, like, you know, knock on wood, you've still got life. Like, let's pace ourselves a bit here.
Yeah, absolutely. So what often when we kind of touched on this a moment ago, but when we think about digital nomads, we have this like vision of people like living on a beach, sipping cocktails all day and like millions coming into our bank account. But this really isn't the reality for pretty much all of us. So can you talk a bit more about the kind of mindset that you need to have to successfully live and work remotely?
Yeah, so I think, understand, if you want to go live the life of an influencer, as it were, let's put it out there now. If you want to go live that like lifestyle that we've seen on Instagram constantly for years, go try it out for a week, see how you fare. Or if you want to do it, go do it for a week and, like, you know, on holiday somewhere, and like you do you, and like no judgment here, but I'm also judging. Like at the end of the you know, it's each to our own at the end of the day. Like, I think is a big part of it. So from my perspective, again, it kind of came back to what is it that I want to do? Like, what does being remote provide me? And that was a mix of, again, I work best when I'm able to work from an environment that works best for me. That's not that I want to sit in my pajamas at home all day. Again, been there, done that. Like, do it still. But I like to switch up my environment because that's how I produce my best results for my clients, for one thing. I like being in control of my schedule. Going to an office 5 days a week, it was just not for me. And again, I don't produce results that way. So that was a big thing for me. It was understanding what my best, I can do it from a cafe in London, I can do it from a cafe in Bali. It doesn't matter where. I think understanding that you've got to have a certain discipline, which I'm really thankful I got to practice while still in full-time employment. Sure, it still took then an extra, like, kind of something. I don't know how you would explain it yourself having gone freelance, but I feel like when you're freelance, you have to find an extra, like, bottle of resilience and gumption to then find work, know that you can find the work, and keep going when all seems lost. It's just a whole other mindset that you're just not used to using, I think, in a society like ours. Yeah, even down to, I remember doing my first tax return, I was like, oh my god. Whereas now I'm a dog, I love doing my tax return, I'm like, yay me and my money. Like, it's just like, yeah, like doing it now. But again, it's being so much more in control, which sounds great in theory, but then it's understanding that that's very much your responsibility. I think whether that's going freelance, going remote, whatever it is, understanding that it is all on your head if you don't get these things done. So I think it's just this kind of extra level of responsibility and accountability, I think, that you kind of have to get to grips with yourself. It's scary, but it's super exciting. I love it. It's still the best decision I ever made. Even, like, you know, we went into the first lockdown and I was going, oh my god, I'm not going to get the grants for like a year from the government, I've got to work my ass off. It was still the best decision I've ever made, because again, it meant that I could go pick out the contracts I wanted, even in lockdown. It was just, yeah, again, that extra level of freedom that makes me feel alive. for me, it makes me feel alive. So I guess it's all these kind of different things that are just a different mindset to when I was in full-time employment. And it's just deciding whether that's something that's for you. It's so doable. It's so doable for anybody, providing that they are willing to put in the work and understanding that it's just going to take that little bit extra. Just take that little bit extra, but the results are amazing.
It's so good. It's so good. As you say, like having that freedom and that sense of fulfillment. I do feel like resilience is huge. I don't think I've ever been so resilient in my life, because you do have to pick yourself up over and over again. It is exhausting. You do go through tough periods. And as we spoke about kind of before we started recording the podcast, like August is typically a slow month. So you get back to August and things are slower and you're like, oh my God, does this mean that my life's over and I've got to go back to a 9 to 5? And you have to be like, no, this happens every year. Like, it's fine. And really pick yourself up. But one thing that you said that I really want to reinforce was this idea that anyone can do it. Like, it is possible. Like, we are normal people. We decided that this was the life for us, and we've embraced it and we've made it work for us. And it hasn't always been easy. It is a bit of a slog sometimes. You do have to be really disciplined at times, and you do have to pick yourself back up again time and time again. But it is possible. Whoever you are, you can make it happen.
Yeah. And you know, that's like, it's not necessarily a healthy mindset for me, but I know that it's the difference for me also being self-employed and being remote is that I've kind of had to say, like, there's no person kind of at the end of like the phone, or at the end of, or whatever it is, on a desk opposite you going, oh no, just go home, it's fine, we'll sort it out in the morning. Sometimes you really just have to go yourself, no, it gets done now. And I have been working longer hours than I maybe should have done to get something done, but it's just this kind of extra level of like, I really want to push myself to make like this a really good thing, and no one's going to get it done but me. But then again, some of my favorite results have come from being freelance and being remote, and then when you see it, you're like, it made all that extra effort worth it. So yeah. It's magical. It's scary, but it's great.
It's so nice to be able to look back on what you've done and be like proud of the stuff that you've produced. And I know myself, when I've had that freedom and when I'm feeling at my best and I'm allowing myself to let the creativity flow, I always produce really good stuff that I look at and I'm like, I'm so pleased that that's me. Whereas when I maybe try and force things, or when I fall into like the trap of kind of performing the way that I'm told I should, so like trying to structure my day. I know we had a conversation last week about what's your work structure look like, and I was like, well, I don't really have one, but the time where I've tried to force myself into a structure, I'm not so productive and I don't produce my best work. So I've really learned to kind of embrace who I am, my creativity, and just do things my own way, and then I can be proud of what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
So kind of carrying on from that as well, like living in lots of different places as well, especially with the traveling that you've been doing since October, it must be hard to motivate yourself to work and not spend all day every day exploring. So when you move around so much and when you land in a new country, how do you like actually stay focused, and how do you make yourself be productive if you kind of look out the window and you're like, all I want to do is go and look at this new place?
I mean, it depends on the client sometimes as well. So sometimes they'll say, okay, well, they'll ask me to set my structure. So for example, I've got a travel day, I'll work with clients on different days or whatever. So I maybe like book a train on like the Monday, and then we'll work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is. So I always make sure I kind of structure it so it doesn't interrupt my work with them. But in terms of day to day, I think it's just knowing what gets you up in the morning. I think it's knowing what it is you want to, setting out your intentions for the trip you're doing as well. That was something I did for every trip. For example, Mexico City, originally I was going to go for 4 weeks, but then the flights happened to be 5 weeks, and I'm so as in cheaper to go for 5 weeks. So for me, that was actually really good, because I knew that I wanted to go to Mexico City, stay based in Mexico City, and see as much as possible across those 5 weeks. And everyone was going, oh my God, you got to go to Oaxaca, you got to go to Puerto Escondido, you got to go to like all these different places. And I was like, no, I was getting panicky being told to go outside the city, because it's huge. Like, and I wanted to, like you mentioned before, I wanted to immerse myself in the city and get to know the city. So knowing that was a big part of it allowed me to then relax into it. And I was like, okay, today I'm going to go check out this cafe and do 2 hours here. Then I'm going to go, or I'm going to stay at home today so I can get this done, or I'm going to go to a co-work space and spend more time across the day just immersing myself in that. So I think before you go, having an idea of what it is that you want to see, plan it. And because I planned all my like day trips and stuff, so if it was I wanted to do a hot air balloon over pyramids, then I made sure that was set on a particular day. Didn't go like obviously when I was supposed to be working. It takes discipline again. It sounds so simple, but it's the discipline, I guess. Whereas, you know, I knew I was going to back in May, I knew I was going to Dubrovnik, Kansas City and Montreal for events, so therefore I actually didn't work for those 3 weeks, because I was like, I just need to focus on networking, being present, and like actually being here. So it takes a lot of knowing what it is you're going for. I mean, if you're looking for like, you know, 3 months and just to chill, then like great, you know what you're doing, and you probably set up a routine that works best for yourself. It's just understanding, like going back to what we were talking about before, I guess, about understanding how you work best, setting out clear boundaries with your clients. And I think, yeah, just knowing what's going to get you up. Is it, I want to go to a place where they make great flat whites? I know I do. Like a place that's got great Wi-Fi. Like I want to make sure that I book space in a co-work space, because then I can be in a kind of office setup while still around other people. It's just understanding what your intentions are and being really strict with yourself, because again, you've got to make coin to keep traveling. So how else are you going to do it? And yeah, I suppose it's also about knowing your practices and doing mindset practices for yourself. So for me, I do like 10 minutes of journaling every day. I do meditation, just checking in with myself. I work with accountability partners and have done for 2 years. So it's just knowing what practices you need to put in place as well to keep yourself on track.
I love that. I love the idea of the setting the intentions before you go somewhere. And I suppose as well, like part of the travel experience is things like going and working in different cafes, like eating different food, going to the co-working places. Like I'm much more of a traveler that enjoys doing those types of things than saying like, oh, I'm going to go to all the museums or do all this kind of stuff. Like I like to be where the local people are, I guess. And one thing that I also like that you touched on was having your mindset activity. So like the journaling and the meditation, that's something we talk quite a lot about on the Confidence Show. So in terms of journaling, do you just sit and write like a stream of consciousness? Do you do a gratitude list? Like what's your kind of journaling style like?
So I mentioned this a lot on my podcast, and it comes up quite a bit. I read The Artist's Way a year and a half ago. Funny enough, was an exercise I did with my accountability partner at the time, and that has a whole section in there, like spoilers, that gets you to write 3 pages every morning of just stream of consciousness. And that I found really helpful doing it while I still read the book. But then I came to a point where I was like, I can write a page of A4 and I feel like I've said what I need to say for the day. It's got the rubbish thoughts out of my head. It's got, or you know, I'll have like a page of "you're doing great, Han," and like ideas, whatever it is you need to say to yourself before you start the day. So I kind of think of it like that. It's sort of, you know, well, whereas now I've actually got a journal which I'm looking around and I haven't got to hand, but it's Notes of Change journal by Chelsea Kauai, who's an Instagrammer, and this little book has been so helpful. It's with the journal, sorry. So it has little questions in it. It's just 2 sides of A5, sorry, every day. And it's how are you feeling today? What are you celebrating today? What are you noticing today? And then you have another side of A5 that's blank, just to write whatever extra you want to. And even that is just enough for me now to go, okay, I've checked in the questions. This is also what's on my mind, and and then at the end of it I always put, let's go, I've got this, and I close the book. I think it really depends on what it is you're trying to get from it, but for me it's normally just clearing chaff in my head for the day.
I love that, and I love the sound of that journal. We'll have to link that in the show notes because that sounds like a great resource. I'm going to go and have a little look afterwards as well.
Oh, I'm so annoyed. I've normally got it right next to me, but I've put it somewhere. I was just doing content, so I've put it somewhere. Sorry.
No, that sounds so good, and I do agree with that. Getting all that stuff out of your mind so that you can kind of start a day fresh. Do you ever find it hard to be consistent with those practices when you're like moving around, or do you ever think, like, do you ever wake up in the morning and think, oh God, I've got to get straight on with client work, and kind of let your self-care or your mindset stuff go?
I'm human, so it happens, but I've got to a really good place with it where I notice the difference. Because also one thing that the artist way takes you through at some point, I'm sure it's the artist way that does this, is it takes you through, okay, what are some of the practices and things in your life that you can't do without to start your day? And for me, that first cup of coffee in the morning is just my favorite. I'm not a I used to be 4-6 cups person a day, which is not healthy. But my one coffee in the morning is just the perfect thing to set me off in the day. I don't know what it is, but I love it. So what I'll do is I'll have my one coffee in the morning and I'll sit and do that journal. And just doing that, having that kind of mindful practice for literally 10 minutes sets me off so much better. And I notice the difference in how I then go about my day from when I don't do it. So it's almost kind of become a should. I should do this. And like, I have to do this in order to set myself up right for the day. But it took some practice to get there. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that non-negotiable to really help you feel successful and to be more creative. And I think that's such a fabulous way to start your day. And whenever anyone talks about kind of what they do in their morning routine, I'm like, I want to structure my morning routine like that as well.
And I definitely don't think I'm someone who has great structure. I just know that I've kind of come to a place with, I suppose, also traveling, you kind of have to learn to be way more flexible. And I was already quite a flexible person anyway, but I've had to learn to be even more flexible. But there are just, I guess I probably didn't explain that very well, but I think there are just some practices in the day that we all do that are just kind of non-negotiable. That's it, non-negotiable. There's some non-negotiables in your life. And that for me is that first cup of coffee when I wake up and 10 minutes of journaling now, because the difference it makes. It took practice to get there, because before, like I've in the past I've done it where I'm like, a non-negotiable for me is going to a yoga class before going to work. Well, I can't really do that like when I'm on the move. So non-negotiable now is having that cup of coffee and journaling before I start the day and tackle emails and all the rest of it.
I think that's great. I think it's good to kind of, again, like be flexible with the practices that you have and know that they are open to change, but also still committing, as you say, like even 10 minutes a day just for yourself. And if that does change, then that's fine, but just giving yourself that great start so that you can achieve the best results for yourself.
Absolutely.
And for your clients, obviously.
Yeah.
I have to remember those. So obviously we've talked a lot about like living to your own schedule and being able to travel to beautiful places while you're working. That's really appealing as being like a digital nomad. Are there any other benefits that people maybe don't talk about so much, that you would kind of say are a good reason to work remotely?
Again, it depends on, I suppose, like sort of your own priorities in life. The first thing that came to my mind when you said that, you asked that, was well-being, honestly. I mean, like I said, I used to, even when I worked on like half in London, half in Surrey, I was still drinking too much coffee in the day, for example, to get myself through. I saved something like £100 from traveling into London for 3 days a week in the pandemic, which of course then gave me enough money to then completely reinvest in like all my tech while over the pandemic. I think there are just some things that I feel like when it's not talked about enough, the lifestyle side of it and people's well-being is just still not talked about enough. And I think understanding that giving people the space to create those results instead of creating this kind of big brother approach to work, which we still see a lot of, unfortunately, it's damaging people's well-being. You know, whether it is drinking too much caffeine and running down your liver, whether it is just making people burn out. Again, like there's a lot of articles coming out now about how burnout is just the new normal state of being, and that's not okay. So I think the biggest thing that I'm still trying to champion is that remote working provides you the ability to look after your well-being how you need to, and as well as create better results for your clients if that's how you do work. And yeah, I suppose those are the two things that are still just not talked about enough in my mind.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I guess when you're in like a corporate job or in like a 9 to 5, there's this whole mindset and this concept of like living for the weekend, and you have a really stressful week and you commute and you spend so much time focused on your job that it gets to the weekend that you want to go out and you perhaps drink a lot, or you don't really do anything, or you don't have the energy to take care of yourself as much as you could. Whereas when you are flexible with your work schedule, you can be more proactive in scheduling things like workouts or taking time to go for a walk, or you don't have that thought of like, oh, it's been a really stressful week at work, I'm going to go out and party all weekend. Like you can put like practical things in place to look after yourself better. And I think health is so important, especially over the last 2 years. Like our mental health is so important, and if working remotely gives you that flexibility to do whatever you can to make sure that your mental health is at its peak, then you're always going to get better results for yourself. You're going to feel more fulfilled. You're not going to have those moments where you kind of hit the self-destruct button for a little while just because it's your only way to cope with what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. It's just being able to keep up with your own life without completely like killing yourself from the inside or going emotionally numb, to put it bluntly. I can't think of it.
Very blunt. No, but I do understand what you are saying, and I feel like I think I first kind of experienced this more maybe Thailand, but Australia was somewhere that I really experienced it because it was a country similar to the UK, but there was this whole work-life balance that we don't have in the UK. Like Australians would finish work and then we'd all go to, I mean, like I didn't have a 9 to 5 job there, I worked in bars, but like people would go for barbecues at the weekend, or you would go to the beach, or you would go for runs or walks in the like rainforest or the park or in the mountains or wherever, and people would actually live their life as well as work a job. Whereas I feel like so much in the UK, people like live to work rather than like work to live. I can't remember what way around it is, but but people are like, their whole focus, that their life revolves around their job and they don't have anything outside of that, and I think it's really unhealthy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's just understanding that working remotely and having that kind of structure and being able to, well, for me freelancing obviously has been a huge part of that also, but just understanding that your personality is not your job, or rather your personality. So it is something that you do and something that you do well, hopefully, but it's not your whole personality.
Yeah, it's not who you are. It's like, yeah, as you say, something that you do. And I feel like sometimes, even as like remote workers, I know I've fallen into the trap of when people say, like, when people ask you or like introduce themselves to you, or when you're asked to introduce yourself to someone else, it will be like, oh, I'm Rebecca Hawkes, I'm a coach, or I'm a social media manager, or I'm a this. Whereas over the past few months, I've really been trying to kind of almost, I don't know if this sounds a bit dramatic, but almost like take back my identity and remember that my business is something that I do and it's not who I am. And I feel like for a long time those lines were kind of blurred, probably similar to the way that they would be if you were in a 9 to 5.
Yeah, absolutely. I think rather than, obviously it's different when you're writing emails and things like that, but I think maybe when I go to events now, I try to say, okay, now I have a podcast, but I also do X, Y, and Z, or like I'm originally from the UK and like I've lived in Dulla. Even this morning, I wrote in my journal something like, again, I wish I had it to hand, but I've stuck it somewhere because I was doing content before we got online. But I wrote something down in my journal today that I then had to put elsewhere about it. Not, this isn't word for word, but I got to I am the chilled surfer who also runs a successful remote business vibe. Like that was it. It was not, I'm a creative project manager and who happens to also do, live in this place right now. It was, this is what I'm passionate about. This is the kind of thing that I enjoy doing for myself and only myself. And that's the vibe that I give off. But I also happen to have successful remote work and a business that I'm also very passionate about and want to grow and love being around people. It's just understanding. I definitely feel like there's a period at the moment that a lot of us are going through where we're just trying to, like you said, kind of almost like reclaim our identity and focus more on what it is that we enjoy doing for ourselves and make that the priority, rather than, as we've kind of been trained to talk about, our titles, our like accomplishments, and make that all of who we are as people. It's nope, I happen to be like a kind of bit of a weirdo who talks way too bluntly and also loves being around people, but also likes kind of being by the beach, and you get to know that kind of side of me instead.
I love that. And I think that's what really creates like those genuine, authentic relationships, when you can be open about that. And when you really know who you are, you go into conversations and you go into meeting people with that kind of energy, rather than the energy of, oh, I need to tell people what I do because that's how I get clients, or that's how you're going to network best, or like with a purpose. Whereas when you just go, oh yeah, like this is what I do, like I waffle on a bit, like anyone that's listened to the podcast knows I'm a waffler, that's who I am in real life. Like that's what I want people to know about me. Like, this is who I am, and I do these things as well. And that's just another part of who I am, but it's not the sole person that I am.
Definitely. I feel like, especially in the last couple of years, we've been really honing in on what matters to us. And I think that's where we're at now. We're in this sort of pivotal moment where we understand that we are our own priorities now. Our priorities are ourselves, our well-being, who we are as people, and we also only want to be surrounded by those people that add to that as well.
Yes, that's huge. I've definitely noticed, especially being online and on like social media, I feel like I was in this bubble of like the coaching industry, and I've made myself step out of it because I was like, I don't want to be around this. Like, this isn't the environment I want to be around. I want to be around an environment that makes me feel good, and I want to step out into all these other things and focus on my own well-being. And I think it has come from the pandemic of realizing, okay, well, when everything else shuts down, like, who are we? What are we doing? Like, what are we left with? And I think it's really helped many of us to be able to connect with ourselves deeper and kind of come back to ourselves, and as you said before, like reclaim who we are.
Yeah, we definitely had time to be like, right, okay, without all this kind of looking good ways of being, who are we really, what really matters at the end of the day to us. And I feel like my tolerance for certain things in life has definitely dimmed, and I think a lot of people are picking up on that now, not in a bad way. It's just I really only want to focus on the things and the people that are going to lift me up, and likewise vice versa. I don't want to just take, I want to be able to give too, but it's giving people also that want to do things and be proactive and like live right. Like
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really welcome change, and I think it's a good way for things to be going. There were times where like I lived abroad, that I kind of felt quite lonely, and that's something that I also wanted to cover here. Like, because when I moved to Honduras, it wasn't a popular area for digital nomads. Like, everyone on the island was like a diver or a drinker, and I was there like starting my own business, and I felt lonely a lot of the time, and it took me quite a while to make friends. And even when I made friends, I felt very much like I was the friend because I was the girlfriend of the guy that was there, kind of thing. So I found it hard to have my own identity, and that made me feel quite lonely. So have you ever experienced like feeling lonely when you're traveling to new places? And if so, like, do you have any tips for how to not feel so lonely and not kind of be consumed by that loneliness? Because I know for me it can kind of like make me shut off rather than be like, okay, I'm going to push myself out there and make friends.
I learned this one massively when I did my year abroad as a student, that you take yourself wherever you are, or like, I think the saying is wherever you go there you are. Yeah, I think that's the saying. And it just means that you can't run away from your problems. Because I used to, especially in my early 20s, I used to hear people be like, oh, I'm going to move abroad and things are going to be so much better. And it's like, oh, that's really not the way to look at it. Or like, I'm going to move to London and I'm going to get like this job that pays me X, Y, and Z. But yet you're still drinking your problems away and whatnot. Again, not hating on anyone, not pointing fingers, nothing like that, but it was just, I know I had to go through a lot of self-development for myself to figure out, okay, what was it that was really eating at me on the inside, so I could get to the point that if I needed to spend time by myself, I could, and I can sit with myself and 95% of the time be good with that. And it's because, especially when you're traveling, you are going to be alone, you are going to be by yourself unless you have a partner, but even then you're still going to have times where you are going to be alone. And it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But I think understanding that you're going to be on your own, whether it's on a plane, on a train, in an Airbnb, even in a co-work space, because when I did try staying in a co-living space in Mexico City, but I still had my own room, I was adamant that I was not going to stay in a dorm. I'm just not that kind of traveler anymore. But just understanding that there are going to be times when you'll be alone, and now I'm like, I can do it, and I don't even think about it. But because otherwise, yes, you do kind of end up, I feel like I have kind of gone into this lonely space where I suppose my way of dealing with it is, if I'm feeling lonely, I will take myself out of the Airbnb, go do something, whether it's, you know, with other people, meeting strangers, and we come friends from experience. That's one thing. I will go, you know, hang out with, or like, for example, when I was in First and Split, I actually organised a whole Digital Nomad dinner with strangers again on my first night there on a Facebook group. So I reached out on a Facebook group. So much fun. Some people from that dinner, we still hang out every now and again. So I guess it's figuring out what it is you want to go do. Do not wallow. Use that journal. Like, that journal has been amazing for combating that for me. Figure out what it is that's going to get you out of the loneliness. You know, is it that you need to do some exercise? Is it that you want to go see that site? Because also, you don't have to wait for everyone to go before you go. Is it that you want to go have dinner and have a glass of wine with people? Put on Facebook that you want to do that, and normally at least, you know, 3-4 people will go, yeah, me too, if not more. It's finding ways to kind of keep yourself motivated. Again, it comes back to discipline. I think, and knowing yourself. It's figuring out what it is that you want from this. And if it's that you just want to call your mum, then call your mum. Like, that's cool too. Like, or if it's that you want your partner to give you a hug, tell them you want a hug. Like, do what it is that you need to do to overcome that, because you will experience it at some point. Like, that is a guarantee. You will at some point feel lonely, whether that, and again, I like to think that I am so comfortable being alone, but even I've gone, I wish someone was like sitting watching this film with me right now, or like, you know, they were watching this sunset with me on the beach, whatever it is. So it's just being very aware of yourself and doing the work that you need to do to overcome that, I've found. That's a bit waffly.
No, that's such a good answer. Like, really understanding like why you're feeling that way, and then like choosing to do something about it, and being brave, almost like having those moments where you're like, okay, I feel really lonely, like what can I do about this? And like you say, like asking on Facebook, saying like, does someone want to go for a drink? Like, for me, that's a brave act. That's something that's like bold to do, because if you put out there like, oh, do you want to go for a drink, and you get rejected, then you've got to deal with the rejection side of things. Like, it's brave, and you've got to have courage, but the alternative is to sit and wallow in self-pity, and that's not going to be fun for anyone.
And I'll just put a disclaimer out there. I've actually almost never, apart from once, and again, I still went anyway, pretty much every time I posted on a Facebook group saying, hey, who would anyone be up for like going doing some content together, or going for a glass of wine, or whatever it is, literally 9 times out of 10 people have shown up. The one didn't, I probably would have planned it slightly better, but again, I still went, and I actually still made a friend with the waiter, and we follow each other on Instagram. So so like, it still worked out.
Yeah, I think that's good. There's always going to be like the people, probably like me, who are waiting for somebody to invite them, and then there's going to be the people that put it out there, and like you, and are just like, hey, this is what I want to do, do you want to come? And I think that's great to do.
That is honestly my approach for everything. It's not for everybody, but I'm like, I don't see this thing happening, so I'm gonna do it anyway, and if people want to come along, yay, friends.
Oh, I love it. One thing that I also wanted to discuss with you, because I think did I see a TikTok or something the other day that you did? Maybe I think this is where this question came from, but I wanted to talk a little bit about dating whilst you're living remotely, because I hadn't dated for years. I went on a first date a couple of weeks ago. Oh god, it's probably about a month ago now. I hadn't dated for years, and one of the things specifically I wanted to talk about was the whole idea of like you moving around from place to place regularly. Do you find it easy to date or not? And is it something that you actively make the effort to do, or is it something that just happens naturally? Or do you just not date at all? Have I just got that completely wrong and you're just not interested at all?
As soon as you said like, oh, so there's a TikTok you did, I was like, oh no. Where I go to be silly a lot of the time. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's a bit informative, but it's largely my outlet for like my weird, like what you saw of dating. So I have been proudly single for, I can't even count now, years. Because for me, I really wanted to get to Greg, and it was just my decision to do some inner work on who I am, for one thing, when I'm alone and as an individual, and what my identity is again, going back to that conversation, and working on myself to build that resilience again for myself. So yeah, we could do a whole other episode on dating and like the inner work for that. So your question in one short sweet sentence: no, I've not really dated while I've been moving around. Had plenty of chats with people, and funnily enough, like there is an app out now called Nomad Soulmates.
Ooh.
And I have been on, and I gave myself a massive giggle. Dare I expose myself? But it's a very good app for nomads. I'll put it out there now. It's still very fresh. What's so good about that app is it allows you to filter way more than, like, say, Tinder, Bumble and Hinge and all the rest of it does. So if you're like someone who is full-time traveling, who just like wants a one-night stand, you can essentially put out that. If you are someone who has a base but then goes traveling for 3 to 6 months a year, you can put that out there too. So you kind of have that option of understanding how the person travels and how the person lives remotely as well. So there's that added level. But I keep trying, and I'm like, I'm open to it, but I think I've got to that point with things now where I'm like, I know what I want from a relationship, and I feel like once I know, and I'm just such a terrible texter that sitting on apps, and not, well, another app for like, you know, X amount of time, I'm not willing to put in that effort. For me, I'm that person who, if we meet in a bar and we get chatting, and then like we kind of get to a place where we're like, okay, you know, I want to go, you want to go there, or I want to go here, do we keep chatting? Like, I'm that person that's just very open communication about things, and just sort of open to what's out there, rather than being too kind of like, oh well, yeah, I don't know how to explain it. I think the best way to describe it is I'm someone who, if we meet in a bar, get chatting, have good chemistry, we'll work out. We will work out, and we'll communicate. We will communicate. Like,
oh my God, we are so alike. I feel exactly the same. I do feel excited about that whole dating app, the soulmate, the digital nomad soulmate ones, or whatever, because that's exactly what I want. Like, I feel like I am a little bit maybe against is a bit strong, but against like meeting someone in the UK, because I know that I want to keep traveling, I want to live abroad for extended periods of time, I want to meet someone that wants that as well. And I'm like, oh, if I meet someone in the UK, then am I just going to compromise my whole life again like I've done before? Like, I don't want to end up in that situation again. I still want to like live my own life. So very excited about that app, but also completely agree with, I'm a terrible texter. I don't respond to people A, quickly, or B, sometimes not at all. And I don't want to sit there on apps, and I much prefer the idea of like being out in a bar and having a conversation and being like, oh my God, there's chemistry here, like this is really nice. And I think that's one of the things that kind of makes me want to get back into traveling regularly again, because I feel like I can have those experiences or like moments where I can meet people much more openly.
yeah, we don't have the same kind of digital nomad culture. Even in London, we don't quite have the same kind of digital nomad culture in the UK that I've been able to experience in other places and hotspots for nomads. Yeah, I don't know what that is, but I think, yeah, for me, I would rather meet in person, get to know kind of how we bounce off each other straight away, rather than, you know, text for ages and then figure out we don't have chemistry, which is what has happened to me in the past. So,
Yeah.
and when you're nomad, I found that digital nomads and remote workers, remote lifers, slow mads, you name it, a lot of people a lot of the time already know what it is they're looking for. Right, they've done some inner work, they've done a practice, they don't quite have the same sort of lifestyle, so they have less time almost to play with things, and they have a lot more time. Well, they kind of quickly establish what it is they want, and so therefore you can kind of figure it out a lot quicker as well, because their whole thing is like the front focus here normally is travel at the end of the day. So it's a very, very different, but it is a slightly different approach to dating.
I much prefer that approach, and I think chemistry is so important. Like I feel like it's so like it's just crucial. Is it, like, for me it's crucial. Like some people are just like, oh no, like give people a few chances, like go and see them a couple of times, and I'm like, no, I want instant chemistry. I want to meet someone and be like, do we have a vibe? Yes we do. Great, let's carry on chatting. Do we not have a vibe? Okay, well, like why? I don't want to keep giving people like my time and energy if I don't have that instant spark. Like that's so important to me. And I've also been single for years now because I made that choice to like, I want to reflect on myself. I want to connect back with who I am, kind of understand myself a bit more. And I don't even know whether I'm ready for like an actual relationship yet, but the whole idea of dating like is a little bit exciting.
I said, do you know what, actually I was similar until actually I went to my last event in Bansko, where I kind of was at an event one evening and I was like, I know I'm good. I know my value for me, and I know who I am as a person enough that I could kind of go, right, yeah, we could hit it off, like if someone were to come over right now, and or yeah, if I was to like be in wherever it is, and I know that I would be strong enough to go, I'm open to this or I'm not open to this. And it just kind of was a really refreshing feeling to be in a community of people who are kind of similar minded and know that I could be okay no matter what as well. So I think, and I said to a friend, I was like, right, I'm putting it out there. And she was like, yeah, Anne's putting it out there. And I'm like, okay, right, it's out there. But also I'm not going to spend hours on apps. That's just not who I am.
Love that. I feel like, yeah, that's kind of the vibe that I want at the moment as well. Like it's out there, it's gonna happen, but I'm also not gonna spend hours of my life just replying to people that are just gonna ghost me.
Yes, and then but it's this in the same fashion, you know, I don't want to spend extra time now on people who also don't want the same thing as you don't want the things that you want either as well. It's a kind of mutual thing.
Absolutely. And I don't really want to like compromise like I used to. Like I feel like I spent the majority of my last relationship like I was always compromising, and I almost like convinced myself that it would be fine because one day he would compromise for me, and that one day like never came. And I don't want to be in a relationship like that anymore. Like I don't want to have to compromise. I would much rather meet someone who has the same values, who has the same ideals, and who wants to like build the same kind of life that I want to build.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, amazing. To still on the same kind of connections ways, but not in like a romantic space. I've always found that I've been able to build like much deeper connections with people when I've traveled and lived abroad. But with some people, where I've like moved around to like the next place, we haven't stayed quite so close. And I know that's partly because like neither of us have really kept in contact that much. But do you find that moving around often does help you build deeper connections, especially when you're in those nomad communities? And if yes, how do you ensure that you remain close with those people when you do travel to the next place?
I guess the first thing that came to my mind when you said about it was the fact that obviously like we're the generation that's grown up with social media. So it is probably a hell of a lot easier to keep generally in contact and to kind of keep an idea of what's going on in different people's lives anyway. I think that has definitely been a useful connection. And especially like, you know, if someone, you know, says, I can't remember, where was I think I was in anyway, I've been in a couple of places where someone's literally DM'd me and gone, oh my god, you're here, like let's meet up, and you didn't even know, but they've seen your stories on Instagram, for example, and seen that you're in town. So then you go, yeah, we'll meet up for coffee, and you've not chatted in 6 months. I would literally say to everybody that I meet on the road, the invitation is open to you to come and see me wherever I am in the world. Like that's just a given. You just let me know where you want to be, or if you're there, like let me know. If you know you want to come visit me, just say. That's an open invitation. I won't tell you again. It's just there. So that's one thing I always establish with people. I think also I'm generally a very, especially now, like where I'm at in my life, I would say I'm pretty open book from the beginning. So you kind of get to know who I am from the start. So therefore, you know, again, I find it quite easy to pick up where I left things anyway. Like I mentioned when we were chatting about dating, I'm not the best texter. I'm that person who's like, right, we'll meet for a coffee in 3 months. we'll catch up then. Or like I have a very different kind of approach to, I suppose, the normal way of doing things, which would be like, oh, make sure you message people and like, email or like have some system in place. I'm that person who will be like, hey, I'm in town, like want to meet up, and then we'll catch up, and like it'll be like there's been no time at all. So I think that's been the easiest. And I guess, I don't know if you found this from being a social media manager, but being able to also comment like there's no time like in between seeing each other on posts. And talk to them like they are sat next to you, even if it's on Twitter, whatever it is. Just being able to find that sort of level of comfort. And I guess also, again, I found with digital nomads and remote workers that there is that sort of understanding that we'll see each other again. It's never quite goodbye, because we'll see each other on social media for a while and then we'll catch up wherever we happen to be next. So there's definitely a different approach within the community anyway. But I think I kind of try to establish from the off that, I'm very much who I am. I am who I am. And you can ask me anything. You'll get to know me and who I am, I'd say, pretty quickly. And then, like friendship is whatever it is going to be.
I love that so much. And again, like we're quite similar there. Like we haven't spoken for years yet. I feel like I spoke to you literally yesterday, and I know we've been messaging a bit more like the last few weeks, but I feel like I spoke to you yesterday, and I really cherish those kind of friendships. Like I've got a few friends where we have met abroad and we won't speak for like 6 months, and then we'll like go out for drinks and it will be as if we hung out like literally the day before. And I absolutely love it. I feel like for me, those friendships are some of my favorite. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but they're like some of the best friendships that I have, because they're just so effortless. And my closest friends know I'm not somebody that replies to every single message. I'm not somebody that replies immediately or quickly. Like it might take me a week or a couple of weeks to reply. And I feel like the people that are accepting of that, I then feel like our relationship is stronger, because I've not got in the back of my head like, oh my God, I didn't reply, they're going to hate me.
That's also why I love voice notes as well, because I can't sit and type for ages. Sometimes I'm walking to the next thing, or like, if I just can't be bothered to try and get what's in my head onto like, phone, I will then voice note and it will all come out how it's meant to. And then, you've then got my message, you've got me communicating in what I feel is a lot more personal. I know some people are really averse to voice notes, but I love it. I love it. It's just a really quick, easy way for me to make sure that I can reply to you and in the way that I want to, without sitting there for ages trying to figure out how the best to text it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love voice notes as well. And I feel like I've got quite bad, that's a massive lie. I used to have really bad anxiety. I still get anxiety sometimes. I'm getting out of that mindset right now. I used to have really bad anxiety, and I still now get like almost like communication anxiety. So if I'm messaging someone and I'm typing the words, I will more likely overthink it, or I might change the sentence, or I might be like, oh, is this going to come off right? Whereas if you just voice note and you just speak like you normally would, it's so much easier, and people can kind of hear the like the emotion in your voice, so you don't get any mixed wires, or it's just a much nicer way to communicate, I think. Do you ever miss home, like being in the UK full time, or like the stability of working a 9 to 5? I feel like I know what the answer is going to be.
My face give it away. I've grown up moving around quite a bit anyway, because I lived in Spain as a child as well, and then even like through university I moved house every year, and obviously then lived abroad during university. I got very used to moving around. Change was almost my normal, whereas staying put was not. So that was weird for me. But the thing that really, because my kind of like slogan, if you will, for Handmaid's Tale and the podcast is "Home is where my laptop is," and that actually came from reading a book by Gloria Steinem, where she actually talks about, because she also grew, like spoilers, but she grew up moving around like even more. Her family literally lived out of a car for most of her childhood. And she writes about this moment where she was then trying to overcompensate, like I did for a little bit, by moving to a fixed house in a fixed neighborhood and trying to get this stable, quote, in inverted commas, lifestyle. but that also was not fulfilling me. That wasn't, because I still love travel. I like change. I like throwing myself into things. And so it was sort of trying to do the exact opposite of what I had. So reading this book, she essentially said, once I realized that home was like wherever I wanted it to be, I could be home wherever. So for her, I think it was a piece of furniture that she picked up. She was like, as long as I can come to a base, wherever that happens to be, and see this piece of furniture that I love, I've cherished, I've done up myself, I will feel home. And so I started looking at what that was for myself. It completely transformed it, because I was like, okay, it's like, what's my feeling of home? And for me, feeling home was being able to connect to my family or friends. And of course, with social media, with FaceTime, with all these different bits and pieces, now we can actually connect much quicker and swifter than we used to. So that for me was, at the time, home is where my laptop is, before I then had an iPhone and all the rest of it. So establishing that sense of home for myself has made missing home, or the UK, where it happens to be, just kind of fall away. Sure, I miss my family and like the dog and all the rest of it, and I miss seeing friends in person, but it makes it so much easier to deal with being away from my home when you've established a sense of home within yourself.
Oh, I love that. Love it. I also want to go and read that book now. You've dropped so many good recommendations.
I like to read, guys. What can I say?
I'm like an Audible fan. I prefer to listen, because I don't know, I can't concentrate on books when I'm sitting and reading, because my brain is just going constantly. Whereas I feel like if I put an audiobook on, I can just switch off and just tune into that.
That's what I'm like now. This was like sort of because I worked in Waterstones when I was going through college and stuff, so I was a massive books fan before I was ever a tech person, and I was still sort of coming out of that, realizing how little storage I actually have. Of course, I've got a Kindle and I use Audible, so, and I'm the same. My brain all of a sudden is like, nah, I'd rather listen to an audiobook while I'm walking along or doing whatever it is I'm doing. So, yeah. But yeah, this book was called Gloria Steinem, My Life on the Road.
Okay, perfect. I will add it to the list. Okay, so before we go, I want to know your top 3 places to live and work as a digital nomad, and why you enjoy these places so much.
Oh, why? At the moment, I absolutely adore Mexico City. I love Mexico City, and I did a collaboration with a co-work space called Comadre, Co-Mother, and because they are completely revolutionizing how we think about family and structure of family. Beautiful workspace. Definitely go check them out if you're in the city. Love Mexico City. It's fully created. It's just got it's a vibe. It's a whole vibe. And then next I would pick, probably, I keep going back to Croatia again at the moment, so I would say probably Split, but probably in the less summery season, more I'd say May and September. Go check it out. Again, it's less, they haven't really got co-work spaces there at the moment. They had one at one point, but yeah, that's a whole other story. I would say that's good for then chilling out by the sea for a bit of historic, you're sat in like the Game of Thrones like sets at some point. And again, Croatians are so chill, so it's great. And if you're in Split, check out D16 for the best flat white in town. Then what would be my third? I always find myself gravitating back to Spain and Portugal. There are so many other places in my head that I'm also going like, there are quite a few countries actually that I want to go back to. So yeah, at the moment I want to go check out Madeira, because they've got one of the first digital nomad villages ever, and it's supposed to be good for surfing. Then Lisbon I want to go back to, because again, beautiful creative town with great workspaces and cafes. I'm going way over the number now, I know. But then Spain, doing a lot around slow travel and championing slow travel and co-work spaces up and down the country too. So they're more Europe focused, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. Oh my God, I've got so many places that I want to visit now. I'm always like, I want to go here and I want to go there. And I was so jealous of when you were in, was it Bansko? Bansko. Yeah, I was so jealous when you were there. I was like, oh my God, why did I not know about this? Because I would have been there. Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been such an epic episode. I've really enjoyed catching up and having you on here, and I feel like there are so many valuable tips for the listeners. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you more?
I am Han Meets World on everything, apart from Pinterest, which is Han_meets_world. Or you can find the Remote Life podcast on pretty much every single platform that you could think of. It doesn't have its own Instagram anymore, so again, Han Meets World for all the latest updates on that. Otherwise, you can also check out hanmeetsworld.com for extra content and blogs.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll be catching up with you very soon anyway, so we're going to meet up next week. So thank you so much for being a guest, and thank you so much for listening, guys. I will see you in the next one.